Republican State Representative Brian Harrison of Ellis County, thank you so much and welcome back to Eye on Politics.
Always great to be with you, Jack, and thrilled to be with you here in person today.
Yes, nice to see you in person.
Yeah.
And so let's start with the big news this week, which was Governor Abbott's veto of SB 3, the ban on THC products. What did you make of that, and was this a surprise?
Well, I didn't know what the governor was going to do, but I do know that I was the only elected Republican, I think, in all of Texas government who consistently opposed SB 3. I believe I was the only elected Republican in the legislature to call on the governor to veto SB 3, and I did that 3 weeks ago. So I don't think, I certainly had no heads up what he was going to do or not do, but it was unfortunate that the legislature passed a bill that in my opinion, was massively government overreach. It was marching us in the direction of California-style nanny-statism, and it was going to force adults to make a very horrible choice. I mean, these are patriotic, freedom-loving Texans who either want or relied on many of these products into either the very dangerous, deadly black market or to much more highly addictive pharmaceuticals, so it was a bill that needed to be vetoed.
Let me ask you something, because you voted against it.
Yep.
Representative Briscoe Cain of Houston also voted against it in its final form, the final vote. Yeah. And so you were the only two Republicans, as you said, who voted against it. And I'm wondering, I mean, why did all the other Republicans go for it, do you think? And why were you so, because this, according to what they say, the supporters of this, are dangerous products, and that it can hurt Texans.
But we have lots of ways of dealing with lots of dangerous products right now. I mean, we deal with alcohol and we deal with tobacco, which kill far more people than these hemp products. And these are products, quite frankly, people need to not lose sight of this. We're talking about products that became legal as a result of an action that President Trump took in 2018. I remember this very well. I was a senior member of President Trump's administration when he signed the bill that led to this. So we're talking about legalizing products that came about as a result of an action that President Trump took in 2018. And for somebody like myself who understands that the role of government, its number one job is to protect people's freedoms and their individual liberties, I can recognize a bill that goes way too far towards big government, liberalism, progressive style governments, and I will never let, to the extent that I have anything to do with it, I will never let the state of Texas become a nanny state, and that's why I was proud to oppose it.
Now let me ask you something, because the governor in his veto said that this was going to be tied up in the courts. Yeah. And he cited a lot of legal reasons for this. And he said, you know, children don't need to have access to this. He wants there to be heavy regulation. Do you agree with that?
Well, let me make this point. I agree with the goal, the purported goal of SB 3, which is to protect children from potentially dangerous products. Of course, that's a goal that I share, and I share it strongly. But I think that we are dealing with something here, which was SB 3, which is total ban, complete government overreach. It goes too far in the goal that I share of protecting children, and it exceeded the appropriate and proper role of government. I think if we want to treat this stuff maybe perhaps more similarly to the way we deal with alcohol and tobacco with certain age restrictions, that's something that I would be welcome a discussion about, but SB 3 just went too far.
And the governor...
And one more point though, because you did mention the legal questions. I mean, I want to be clear about this. I believe in separation of powers as much as just about anybody in any elected office in the state of Texas, and I would remind people, it is the legislature that writes laws in the state of Texas. And I think we should focus on, as a legislative body, passing laws that we believe in and that serve 30 million men and women in the state of Texas, and do so boldly, and then let what happens in the courts. But we should pass the laws that we believe in.
What do you think is going to happen in this special session? Do you see a scenario in which the legislature, Republicans and Democrats, will agree to, I mean, the governor listed a whole bunch of suggestions as far as potential regulations. Do you see that happening?
I have no idea what's going to happen in the special session, because I think the latest I heard from the lieutenant governor is that he plans to just put SB 3 back on the floor and pass that again. So I do not know what type, if any, agreement will be reached. But I think the biggest point on the whole question of vetoes and special sessions, I mean, I kind of hate that, you know, while I called for SB 3 to be vetoed, I believe it was the right thing to veto. The biggest news really shouldn't be the veto of SB 3. The biggest news really should have been all of the other big government budget-busting liberal progressive bills that were not vetoed, primarily our budget, the most bloated liberal budget in the history of the state of Texas, and also other things we should have gotten done in the regular session, like property taxes.
I was going to ask you about that. I did want to ask, just follow up, finish up on SB 3. You said something before that, you know, President Trump passed this bill in 2018.
Yeah.
Now this was to commercialize, allow farmers to sell hemp, right, on a commercial basis. And I don't think they're impacted. I don't believe they're impacted by SB 3.
There's some debate about that, but I know people on both sides hold different views on it. But I do think there are people arguing that it still might have a very adverse impact on our farmers.
But the question was, at least listening to the lieutenant governor, was these products, some of these products, were far stronger than, you know, than were advertised. And he also said that in the veto, Governor Abbott is basically supporting the legal use of recreational marijuana. What do you say to that? Do you agree with that?
I'm not going to get between the governor and the lieutenant governor on that fight. But what I'll say to the point, though, is that if it's true, some of these arguments that what's being sold in stores is adulterated, it's falsely labeled, it contains illegal products, well, then those are already illegal right now, and the laws on our books should be enforced, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. But a blanket ban is just going too far.
One other question.
Yeah.
Do you support legalizing recreational marijuana?
I don't think anybody in the state of Texas is talking about that right now, and quite frankly, it's a discussion that's moot until the federal government changes its position, because right now, recreational marijuana is illegal at the federal level. So recreational marijuana is going to be illegal it's illegal in Texas today, and it's going to remain illegal regardless of what happens with SB 3 in the special session.
So let's get back to what else you mentioned, because all throughout this session you have really sharply criticized the budget. You voted against it.
Yep.
You have said property taxes didn't go far enough.
Yep.
And you said this is a liberal session.
Yeah.
Is any conservative going to agree with you about that?
Not only might conservatives agree with me, millions of conservatives agree with me. And I hear from Texans all over the state, with outpouring notes of appreciation for the bold, courageous stands that I took, often alone, on the floor of the Texas House to speak truth to power and to push back against the corrupt liberal uniparty that has controlled the Texas government for far too long. This was, in fact, it's not a question of opinion, it's objectively true. This was the most bloated liberal budget in the history of the state of Texas. And let me tell you just one fact about it. This budget represents a staggering 42% increase in state funds over just 2 budget cycles. The state of Texas has not grown 42%. And on top of that, worse, we did absolutely nothing meaningful on property taxes. And ask any property taxpayer in the state of Texas if they believe the legislature succeeded this session. I can tell you what the answer is going to be: no. And here's the facts about that. The overwhelming majority of property tax bills are going to go up. So that's the truth about property taxes. If we're going to have a special session, it should be to address that, because if the voters of Texas wanted us to do one thing, if they gave us one job this session, it was to cut their property taxes immediately and put our state on a path to full elimination. And quite frankly, I offered budget amendments, over 30 of them, on our budget night. I identified $90 billion that we could cut out of our budget, and we could have cut people's property taxes in half, or about 40%, almost immediately.
Give me some examples.
And by the way, real quick, but on the spending, I got one more sentence on the budget, because it's not just what we didn't do on the property tax relief, it's what we did do. Our budget doubles down on DEI. It doubles down on liberal transgender indoctrination in our public universities. And it doubles down on crony, corporatist, corporate welfare. We are stealing money from Texans and using it to bribe companies to move here from California, and then not making these rich companies pay the same property tax bills that ma and pa shops and people that have been servicing their community for generations, or individuals or entrepreneurs. It's just wrong, and Texans deserve better.
Okay, so you said a lot.
Yeah.
So let's break it down.
Let's do it.
So first, going back to the property tax relief.
Yeah. So-called property tax relief.
The governor, the lieutenant governor, all the way down, said it's a quarter of the budget, $51 billion, goes to property tax relief. Everybody's like, how do you get to that number?
Yes.
Because I've asked that question.
Yeah, you've had a hard time getting an answer, haven't you?
Well, what they say is that it's all of the property tax relief that has been baked in already, the increases that are in the Texas Constitution the government still has to fund that, right? I mean, the
Yeah,
government...
You're talking about property tax relief packages that
As
were
far
passed in
as-
2019, 2023, et cetera. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that still is in there, and then this is additional money, 10 billion they said,
Yeah.
this year. So you're saying it's not far enough. Now, when I talked to the Texas comptroller
Yeah.
in January, he told me of the nearly 24 billion in the surplus, more than half of that came from what was left over in 2023 that was not spent. So that's what he told me. It was just leftover money.
Yeah.
So you're saying all that money should have gone back to in property tax
Yeah,
relief.
so there's a lot to unpack.
Is that right?
Well, yes, at a minimum.
Okay.
I mean, I called for $90 billion to be the
Well,
property
how do you
tax.
get to that number? I mean, it just seems excessive.
Well, it doesn't seem excessive if we were fiscally conservative and didn't pass the $10 to $20 billion in new corporate welfare, which is where most of the surplus went. But yes, at a bare minimum, if we started the session with a $24 billion surplus, let me be real clear, we didn't get there because we've been fiscally conservative. We got there because we've been overtaxing the hardworking men and women of the state of Texas, and we started the session with a $24 billion pile of their money on the surplus, and a nearly $30 billion pile of their money in the rainy day fund. And if we had done a 15% budget cut across the board, which is what we should have done after the explosion of spending just 2 years ago, that gets us the bulk of the way to my $90 billion money. And with that kind of cost savings and government cuts, by the way, these are cuts that like no Texan would even notice that it happened. We could cut people's property tax bill down by about 40%, or could have, almost immediately, and put our state on a trajectory to full elimination. But as far as the $50 billion or $52 billion, I do want to say a couple words about that. Number one, I have a standing request in to the Legislative Budget Board to detail to me exactly how they get to $52 billion. It's hard for people to understand the math on that, but let's stipulate it, because this is worse. Let's say that it's true. Let's say a quarter of the budget is in fact being spent on property tax relief. That's actually worse. Why is that worse? Because property tax bills are only going up, and property taxes are at a near record high. So if we are in fact spending $50 billion, but none of it's getting to the taxpayers of the state of Texas, we have a far bigger problem, and taxpayers are being hosed on both ends, because the $50 billion, if that's real, the $50 billion we're spending, we only have it because we taxed the taxpayers to get the $50 billion, and they're paying on the back end in the form of higher property tax bills. So what we're effectively doing, we're not sending checks to taxpayers, we're not lowering tax bills, we're cutting checks from the state government, sending it to the local governments who are being fiscally irresponsible, and we're just subsidizing fiscal irresponsibility at the local government level.
Okay, so let's take that for
Yeah.
example, because during his State of the State address,
Yeah.
the governor said he wanted to clamp down on the spending increases at the local government level. In 2023, according to the Texas Comptroller's Office, local spending by cities as far as property taxes went up by 10%. In 2023 on the county level, they went up by 10%. In 2023 from specialized districts, they went up by 20%. It was 10% on the county and 10% on the state.
Yeah.
So given all that, the reductions were there for schools. So what did people see? People saw their taxes go up. I think it was very little, but they still went up, according to the Texas Comptroller's report. So what happened as far as if you're saying constrain the local governments from increasing their property taxes, why wasn't that addressed this time?
Lots to explain there. First of all, I will tell you that I'm on the Appropriations Committee in the Texas House, and the comptroller testified to me in no unequivocal terms that we could have in fact spent all $24 billion of the surplus and used it to lower property taxes, as opposed to around the $6 billion that was in our budget. So $24 billion surplus, we only used about $6 for new property tax relief. As to local governments raising property taxes, that's absolutely happening. And I've been championing a bill for years to do what I think should be the lowest of low-hanging fruit when it comes to property tax. reform, which is if we can't eliminate property taxes, which we should, if we can't substantially lower them, which we should all be able to agree that at least we should stop the property tax bills from being increased unless it was approved by voters in an election. I have had a bill on this for years, but the leadership of the Texas House refuses to let it even be debated, much less voted on. I actually believe that bill would pass. So we've got, there's a lot of guilt to go around here, but I'm tired of, look, I got elected to a state level office. My colleagues are state level officials in the state of Texas, and I'm sick and tired of them shifting the burden to others. When a lot of people in Austin want to scapegoat the local elected officials, and look, there's blame there for sure, by saying, oh no, it's not the state that is raising property taxes, it's the local governments. Let me be really clear about this. The local governments in the state of Texas are political subdivisions of the state of Texas. So when local governments are raising taxes, it is in fact the state of Texas that's raising their taxes. And let me put the cookies all the way down on the bottom of the shelf. If you're one of the 30 million hardworking men and women of the state of Texas who's doing everything in your power to put food on the table and gas in the tank and provide for your family, at the end of the year, there's only one thing that matters. Did your property tax bill go up? Or did it go down? And I am telling you, as a matter of fact, the majority of property tax bills are going up. And what does that mean? We could talk about the economics and the finances of this all day. At the end of the day, for me, though, this is a moral issue. This is an ethical issue. Because never-ending property taxes mean no Texan can ever own their own home. They're inconsistent with private property rights. And if you doubt me on this, try not paying your property tax bill at the end of the year, and you'll find out real fast who owns your home, and it ain't you.
So what's the alternative? The alternative that I've heard is, because I talked to an expert about this 2 years ago.
Yeah.
How do you eliminate the property tax? This expert who used to work in the state government said, you can do it, but it would take about 20 years to gradually bring it down because the state would have to, where's the revenue going to come from? So the other option is to do what's called a consumption tax or raise the state sales tax from what, 6% now to what, 20%?
No, I reject all of that. And there's some,
so you don't think, so what would your idea be?
There's some very faulty assumptions in there. Number one, they're assuming that the government needs every penny that it's getting today. That's a ridiculous assumption. That's the type of assumption maybe liberal Democrats support, but it's not the kind of approach that conservative Republicans in the state of Texas want. They want government to be smaller. So number one, I'm not looking to replace every dollar because we should be shrinking the size of government. Like I said, we should have a 15% cut across the board. So that's number one. We need to cut government. Unless we realize that. And I'll be real clear on this point too. Any politician in Texas who's talking about property tax cuts but is not fighting for spending cuts is fundamentally unserious. You cannot support property tax relief if you're not talking about cutting the size and scope of government.
So you want a 15% spending cut across the board?
15% across, that would just get us back to where we were 2 years ago.
So where is your spending level? I mean, because there also has been...
I think if we went back to 2 budget cycles ago, that would be a huge start.
2021.
And all of the crony corporatist corporate welfare that we passed, that was between 10 and 30 billion. Take half the rainy day fund, that's 15 billion, 24 billion of the surplus. I'm telling you, I can get to that 90 real quick and my team will send you the numbers on this. But here's the other point that I want to make on this whole, this canard, this red herring that, well, if we got rid of property taxes, we'd have to have a sales tax of 22%. That's just not true. Number one, we cut spending so we don't have that much to replace. But number two, if you broaden the base of the sales tax and cut the property taxes, one of the biggest drivers of costs for small businesses across the state of Texas is how much they're having to pay just to pay rent on their businesses. Prices would go down, and if the base were broadened, I'm not sure we'd have to have that much of an increase in the sales tax rate at all.
So
all this is fear-mongering from people who do not want to disrupt the liberal status quo.
So when you talk about broadening the base, so gardening services, there'd be a sales tax. On all the things that are exempt, legal services that they don't pay a sales tax, that would be, people would pay a sales tax,
I think those are the types of discussions that would need to be had.
Okay.
What would be broad, what would be included, what would be excluded. But keep in mind the trade-off is that Texas would be a state in this country that doesn't have an income tax. It wouldn't have a property taxes. People could finally own their own home. We would be supporting private property rights. And Texas would go from not just being one of the primary economic engines in America. The state of Texas would be the economic juggernaut of the planet. And Texans would be the most free people on planet Earth. And that's my goal. That's what I'm fighting for every single day in the government of the state of Texas.
Let's talk about another potential topic that may come up in the special session, and that's redistricting.
Yep.
redrawing congressional districts in Texas. There was a New York Times report, plus I've talked to other members of the legislature like yourself, and asked about, I mean, the president wants Texas to redraw the congressional districts to favor Republicans, increase the number of Republicans before the 2026 election. Is this something you support and hope that the governor adds to the special session?
I want to do everything I can to make sure that the Congress at the federal level stays in Republican control. That's what I think the majority of Texans want, and I firmly want the legislature of the state of Texas to do everything we can to support President Trump and his agenda. And if we can get some more congressional seats that are commensurate and appropriate to the makeup of the state of Texas, that's something we should do. But I don't want to miss the biggest point on the special sessions, is that the 89th legislative session, I firmly believe, was a liberal train wreck. The people of Texas are less free because the 89th session happened. Government grew, liberty shrunk, people are less free. And if we're going to go back to Austin, we better take care of the single biggest failure that came out of the 89th, and that's the issue of property taxes. I don't want to go down there just to do one thing. If we're going to be in Austin, we should make up for some of the liberal damage that came out of the 89th session in the last 5 months.
Do you think that's going to happen?
It needs to, and I was the first elected official, I think, to call for a special session on the issue of property taxes. I was the first elected official to call for countless bills to be vetoed. I even joked online that if I were the governor, my staff would be having to shop for veto pins at Costco or at Sam's Club, because there were that many bills that needed to stop from becoming law. Unfortunately, many of them got signed or were allowed to become law, including things like the biggest teacher union bribe in history, stealing $1.5 billion out of Texans' back pocket to give to liberal Hollywood. I mean, here's the short reality. Texans are less free right now than they were when this legislature gavelled in January, and the hardworking, freedom-loving men and women of the state of Texas deserve much better than they're getting from their government.
2026.
Yeah.
What's your plan? Are you going to run for re-election? Or a lot of people think that you may run for Congress.
You know, let me tell you, I have not made any decisions. I don't have any announcement to make here. It's been the pride of my life to represent 200,000 Texans in Ellis County in the Texas legislature. And let me tell you, though, I am humbled on a daily basis by the hundreds and thousands of people that reach out to me asking me to run for IR office. And I don't think it has as much to do with me as it has to do with the fact that Texans are starving for bold conservative leadership. They voted for that when they went to the ballot box last year and re-elected President Trump with a 14-point mandate. They want bold conservative leadership. They deserve bold conservative leadership. But the reality is, what they watched over the last 6 months is that they're not getting that from the elected Republican leadership in Austin, Texas, and they deserve better.
So you are eyeing or considering higher office?
My wife and I are having many prayerful discussions with people all across the state of Texas, but I've got no announcements here for you right now. What I care about, number one, is to make sure that the state of Texas, see, here's the deal, Jack. We have a reputation for leading in freedom and liberty as a state. But here's the truth. For far too long, the government of the state of Texas has been just coasting on that reputation, and I think it's past time we start living up to it, and I'm going to do everything in my power for every day that I'm in elected office in the state of Texas for Texas to once again retake its rightful place as the #1 state for freedom and liberty, not just in the country, but I want Texas to be the leading light of liberty for the entire planet, and that's what I'm fighting for.
State Representative Brian Harrison of Ellis County, thank you so much.
Always great to be with you, Jack.
We appreciate it. Good to see you.